All right. Good morning, good night, good afternoon, wherever you're at in the world as you're listening to this. I'm really excited to get to share time and space with Liz. Met her in different trainings. So that's how my path has crossed with her. And I'm really excited for you all to get to hear about her mustard seed that she would like to offer to the world. And so Liz, if you want to start with your introduction and then you can roll right into it.
Okay, thank you so much, Tara. So I'm Liz Phillips, and I am a trainer in training for the IFIO organization. So I'm becoming a trainer, and I'm a couples therapist. I live in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and I am a cisgendered heterosexual Jewish woman, and I grew up in Jamaica and the Philippines. Came back to Canada when I was 13, child of divorce. Um, yeah, I think those are sort of the most salient points. Mother of a very adorable Chihuahua named Jackson Bug, love of my life and my heartbeat. And yeah, I thank you for inviting me, to talk about my mustard seed because I do have one that, rolls around in my head all the time and I'm constantly thinking about it and reworking it and applying it to myself. So this morning I really sat down and thought, how can I put this into a really succinct sort of elevator pitch, if you will? So, shall I just get
Yep.
going and say what
Yeah.
that is? Great. So, if I could blow a mustard seed into the world, it would be to help people unhook from trying to change others and to help them U-turn towards themselves, but that U-turn is actually in service of being with others. So what do I mean by that? And I guess I know that I have spent my life trying to change other people to little to no effect, starting with my parents who had a fractious separation, but I could feel energetically things weren't good between them. Um and I was always trying to intervene, and find a way. And I think that the words in my head and probably out loud were, if you would only, if
Mm,
you only say this differently, if you would only have a different thought, if you would only have a different action, then you two might understand each other. It's like I was the translator. So that was, when I think about changing other people, that's where it started. And then, of course, that became my way of being in the world with friends, with partners, with, niece and nephews, even my dogs, my previous dog, if you would only.
mhm.
So that's the piece about changing others. And then at the same time, what I was feeling inside myself was unworthy of love, unwanted, discardable. And of course, that came from my family history. And so there's this disastrous combination of I feel terrible about myself and I need to change you. And this combination is actually kind of what we address in IFIO couple therapy. And it's something that I've wanted to take out into the more into the public, more and more so people had access to this because it's the most common combination I see. Because the reason we want to change others is because there's something about ourselves that we're unhappy with and we project. So is that making sense so far?
Yeah, it's making sense. And I'm curious if whether it's in this moment or another moment, as you get to sit across from people and just, even as you interact, what do you hear is like one of the main fears of people not wanting to do that back to themselves?
I don't think the fear is always conscious, but I think as we unfold it, as I help people U turn, unhook from the other person and U turn back towards themselves, what that looks like in couple therapy is someone might say, if only they would stop doing that thing, I wouldn't have to feel this way. And I would say, well, if they could stop that, let's just say they could, what would that do for you? And then they're going to start to talk about this underlying need. well, I wouldn't feel so like I didn't matter, or I wouldn't be walked over or talked over, or I wouldn't be ignored. And then you're starting to get a flavor of that need or core belief or core wound underneath.
Yeah.
So, and then they start to see that with my help. So, I might say it sounds like there's some part of you that feels like you're not good enough or you're not lovable or, that got really badly hurt in this or that previous experience, usually in childhood.
Yeah. And I'm curious as you say that, because the one thing that I realize often sitting across from people, and even within my own journey, is just not being taught in a young age or as you're developing, right, growing up, how to negotiate those relational needs. And I want people to hear that if you don't know how to do that, that doesn't make you bad or wrong. It means that maybe this is your opportunity to really slow down, to feel into yourself.
That's right. And I want to pull out a little bit so that we can go exactly right back there because we aren't taught these relational needs. We aren't really taught how to relate. Our parents weren't taught.
Mhm.
There are models for parenting, but I mean, I'm 56 and the model my parents had was laid out by Dr. Ferber, who said let your baby cry it out in the crib, they're fine. And actually, now the neuroscience shows us that the baby's not fine. And I could feel it in my own system. I remember feeling, I didn't have the words, but I do remember that feeling of no one's coming.
Mhm.
No one's coming. And that's the feeling I've had my whole life. No one's coming, and it must be because I'm not lovable.
Mm.
And it's encoded in your body and how you react, because it was pre-verbal. So how it shows up in my body, if it starts to sense or worry that that's happening again, is this drop in my stomach, my heart races,
Yeah.
and I've got this fear, and my brain stops functioning because I am now flooded with no one's coming and flooded with it somatically.
Yeah, and I want to slow down right here because this is actually really important. I want people to really hear this and maybe for us to go slow with this, that there's a lot of times what we carry, it doesn't have words.
That's right.
And our brain loves words. It loves to make meaning. It loves to get it like in that equation so that it has that control and so that's more comfortable. So, Liz, there right here in this moment, for someone who maybe this is the first time they're hearing it, I could imagine them feeling like, oh, I got to eat this apple all in a bite. And I know that's not what you're implying or meaning, and I know so many people's systems may say, well, I don't know how to do this, and then almost getting that frantic motion.
Yeah.
And I call that the eating the apple in the whole bite. And so I want them to maybe hear this invitation that they don't have to do it all in one bite.
No, absolutely not. And maybe I could talk a little bit about my own story
Sure.
because that way I can show people that it doesn't happen in a bite. It happens over time learning about yourself. So, there was this moment for me, as because I was carrying this feeling of unlovability in my body. And then, that created a lot of ways that I was relating to people that were really maladaptive. So, if I felt like a partner was going to freeze me out, I might start to go into a rage,
Mhm.
or I might freeze them out. Or, sorry, if I felt they were going to abandon me, that's how my system would respond. And it wasn't until, this was before I was a therapist, I ran into this amazing book called A General Theory of Love. It's written by two neuroscientists and a psychotherapist. And that book, it's written really for lay people. So, this is how you can bite size that apple. What I learned in that book is that the way our bodies work, the way we develop is relationally. So we're born into relationship and we develop through relationship. And so even though, your organs know what to do to function, like your heart beats without your permission, your
Mhm.
digestion happens, but your brain develops in relationship to another brain. It's the only thing that can't really develop or do what it needs to do on its own. And so it's constantly being shaped by other people. And your nervous system, actually, even though your heart knows how to beat, it's going to be shaped by other people, whether or not it's racing or what causes it to race. So if you're grew up in a household, where people were frightening to you when you were little, your nervous system, your heart is going to race more quickly, more easily when something starts to look frightening. Mm-hmm. And what I really appreciated about learning that was that I was not defective, that I was shaped by the people around me, and not because they meant to harm me and they were monsters, but that my fears and my thoughts about myself and my reactivity and how sensitive it was shaped by how scary my environment could be. So my body was doing things without my permission. So just learning that my body might react without my permission, and then learning through therapy that I could do something about that. One thing you can do when your body is, what we call dysregulated, having a big reaction, is you can breathe differently. When you inhale, you bring energy in, you activate what we call our parasympathetic system, which we use for engaging and being creative and, walking, standing upright. If we breathe out more slowly than we breathe in, we engage our parasympathetic, and that's the part of our nervous system that helps us rest and digest. It's going to bring you into that rest and digest place if your exhale is twice as long as your inhale. There are ways that we can learn how to reshape that. So let me just pause there and just see how that's landing with you, if you need more elaboration.
Yeah, no, that lands really well. And I will often hear people say, well, I don't want to be a victim.
Yes.
And I'm curious, as you hear that from your own experience, whether you've navigated that yourself or you've helped others, what comes up when you hear that, well, I don't want to be a victim?
Yeah. I'm so happy you asked that, because I thought about that very thing this morning.
Hmm.
So when we're young, under age 10, maybe even until 12, we are vulnerable and dependent, right? We're dependent on our caregivers for our safety, for our love, for their positive regard to help shape how we feel about ourselves. When that happens imperfectly, or there's a chronic cycle of abuse, like somewhere on that spectrum, we at that age don't have a lot of choices and options. It's not like we can pack a bag and leave, especially if there's no refuge, like there's no trusted adult around, there's no sense that you're going to be held in some other way. And so you are a victim because you can't protect yourself at that age. But what happens, in terms of the internal family systems model, is that we develop ways to protect ourselves given those circumstances. So that might look like, in my case, is be a good girl, be in service of others, be a caretaker, but in an extreme way, fly under the radar, so that no one is angry at you. Because in my house, it was about tripping up my mother's anger. So just don't ever trip it up, and then you're going to be okay. But then what happens is, as those develop in childhood and they get brought into adulthood, I become sort of this extreme people pleaser. But actually, what I'm not getting is the care and the positive regard that I want. I people please in the hopes of getting that. But the other adults around me don't know that. They're just like, wow, Liz is so generous, and they accept what I'm offering. And some other part of me inside is sort of feeling victimized. Like, I give you so much. How come you don't give me anything back? Especially with partners.
Yeah.
In my 30s and even into my 40s, I did a lot of extreme caregiving of my partners, somehow hoping that they would figure out that I wanted some of that. But they, I couldn't ask for anything directly. And so I felt victimized by that. So, this is how that happens. And what I bring in here is systems theory. And don't worry, I'm not going to make this complicated. But, think about relationships or systems, right? That, right now, you and I are having a conversation and you say something and then it lands on me and I sort of think about it and integrate it and I formulate a response and then I send it your way and then you think about it and it probably has an impact on your body. So we're born into these systems where we are in constant connection with each other, but we're having an impact of each other. And one person changes the other person and vice versa.
Yeah.
And, oftentimes what happens when we've been victimized in our childhood is that we don't actually know that we're part of a system that we can actually influence. We don't see ourselves as influencers in that system. And you can see that on a larger scale. You think about systems of oppression and how it will keep people in these states of subjection.
Mm-hmm.
But if you bring it back down to just, the microcosm of the family, I think about how I felt like a victim, that I had to wait to see if someone, a man, let's say, was going to choose me
Mm-hmm.
and love me and see me. And I didn't understand that I had a role in that dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
So, understanding that we have a role is very empowering. And how we get there is through that U turn. And I can talk about more about the how in a second, but let me just pause and see how that's sitting with you.
Yeah, I have to just name that statement of we don't know that we are influencers was really powerful. And a lot of people with not realizing that, and I can even see this into adulthood, that this would really impact the way you are with yourself, with your partners, as parents, as a friend, as a coworker, like this could really, I could see the snowball of impact this has on all the systems that an individual walks into.
That is correct. So let me give you a concrete example.
Yeah.
So, because I think of it as these, I don't know if they're opposing forces, but there's, the part of me that who wants to change other people says, if you could just stop doing that, I won't have to feel this way. That is me giving my power over to someone else to make me feel different.
Yeah.
And it's also trying to change them in this way. It's trying to influence, but the way it's doing is trying to control them. And
Mhm.
no one responds well to that. So, in fact, in a systems framework, the other person's going to feel that energetically. And, Liz is trying to control me, and they're either going to push back or they're going to withdraw.
Yeah.
If I make a U-turn towards myself and ask myself, like, well, why do I need them to change? What if I could feel differently whether or not they change?
Mm.
It's this need in me that's trying to get met.
Mm.
So let's say, there was this pattern in my last romantic relationship where if I sent a text to my partner and I didn't get a text back within 5 minutes, my body went into that, worry, I'm being abandoned. My
Mhm.
body first took over. And as it took over, my brain went, oh, we better make sense of this. And so the way it made sense was, you're about to be abandoned, your partner's having an affair, or they're about to break up with you. Anyway, whatever it is, something terrible is about to happen because they haven't responded within 5 minutes. So the story got going, which then made my body start to get more and more afraid. So that by the time we were back in touch, I was in a rage and I would rage at him or I would freeze him out. Well, on the receiving end of that, how do you think he's going to react? He's going to defend himself. He's going to justify himself. He's going to get angry, maybe attack back, freeze me out, all kinds of things, right?
Mhm.
When I got help in therapy with the part of me that thought she was getting abandoned, and I learned how to be with that so that I could quiet that story because I'm an adult now and I have choices and options. And once I could start to quiet that story and my body could come into regulation, I could think differently. I could have other perspectives. One could be my partner's in a meeting or his phone is on silence. There's so many more options than he's having an affair.
Mm-hmm.
My brain just went to the worst case scenario. And then what I learned how to do was, instead of telling him he had done something wrong and he should answer me within 5 minutes, what I learned how to do was recognize, oh, I'm scared. Maybe I could speak for that. So that next time it happened, I said, when I don't get a response within 5 minutes, I notice that I get really scared and I start to make up all these terrible stories. And then my partner had room because it wasn't about him, it was about me.
Mm-hmm.
And then he could say, that sounds horrible. Why would you make up a story that I'm having an affair? I love you. I hate that you're going through that. Is there something I can do? There's no guarantee he's going to have that response, but it increases the likelihood when I can talk about myself rather than go on the attack towards him.
So right here, I can imagine this for people who maybe they haven't had therapy, or maybe they just haven't had this exposure, that this moment right here is very different than that habitual way that they always have responded, or because this is how they got taught how to navigate, relational conflict. That right here is probably really different. And so I'm curious, as people are listening and they're hearing that and they would like the opportunity to do that, could you just hone in again on that U-turn? Because you've said it quite a bit, and I really want people to get another taste of it, if
Yeah,
that's okay with you.
absolutely. And I think these are potentially new concepts.
Yeah.
What's the distinction here? And again, I'll use myself. I remember before I went into therapy, it was even before memes, like there was no internet. I'm that old. But, I would hear people would say things like, well, you have to love yourself first. It's really
Hmm.
important to love yourself first. And it used to enrage me because I was like, well, how do I just suddenly start to love myself? I don't love myself. So now I feel punished, because now that I can't love myself, does that mean I'm not deserving of love? I'm not going to get love. But what I learned to do through internal family systems, which is a therapy modality, is I learned that it's not about loving yourself, it's about getting curious about what happened to me, so that I'm getting turned towards myself. And um, let me put this into even more concrete terms.
Hmm.
And I will use a therapy framework, but you don't need a therapy framework because I'm going to give you the questions that get asked in therapy. So if I said to a couples therapist in relationship to that story I just told about my partner, he doesn't answer my text within 5 minutes. The therapist might ask, well, when he doesn't answer the text, what do you start to tell yourself?
Hmm.
And I will say, I start to tell myself I don't matter.
Yeah.
And then the therapist might say, and then, what's the emotion that goes with that? How do you feel? And I might say, I feel angry, I feel hurt, I feel frightened. The therapist might ask, what are you noticing in your body even? I might say, my heart's racing, my stomach's clenching. And then from that place, when all that is going on inside of me, I'm going to have a reaction to my partner, right? When I tell myself I don't matter, when I start to feel angry, my heart's racing, that's when I'm going to get rageful towards him.
Hmm.
But really, what's important to then start to even go deeper in that U turn towards myself. Instead of focusing on his behavior, I'm U turning towards my own experience. This part of me that gets so angry, what's it hoping for? What's it actually trying to do for me? And what it's trying to do is to get him to see that I'm hurt and could he please respond within 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Now, that intention makes sense. It wants me to have something that's going to feel better, but how it's going about doing it isn't going to get me what I want. He's not going to respond well to the rage.
Yeah.
And the last thing that's really important that a therapist would ask me, and we can ask ourselves, is what am I afraid will happen if this part of me that gets angry, what am I afraid will happen if it didn't get angry? And the answer to that question for me is um, then he's going to keep doing it. And then I'm going to feel like I don't matter. And then I'm not going to know what he's up to. And then he's going to have an affair. And then I'm going to be stupid and abandoned, just like what happened with my mother.
Mhm.
And then I'm going to be left alone.
Yeah.
And for me, being left alone tracks back to my childhood.
Yep.
As an adult, being left alone, I actually have resources and options that I could get some help if only I knew that that's what the fear was.
Mhm.
I could get a lot of help around how painful it is to be alone. I could be reminded that actually I'm not alone. I have friends, I have, there's a world around me. And because I'm an adult, I can make different choices and options. I can go to therapy. I can get other forms of healing. Therapy is not the only one. So that U turn helps us tune into unmet needs, how the possibility for helping them, I can help myself now, the possibility for healing, and the possibility for changing how we react so that we don't push people away. Those are all the things we can discover in the U turn. And I do want to say one more thing before I hand it back to you, Tara, because I want to tie this back to the systems. If I can turn towards myself and know more about why is it that I feel the way I do? What's the history that has been informing that? How can I bring that into more awareness so that the history isn't controlling me? I'm not a victim to my history. I can start making different choices. I can start healing. Then I am putting myself in a more empowered state. And now I can influence the system. So my influence would be saying to my partner, I get so scared when I don't get a text within 5 minutes. And I know that's about my own history. But I'm wondering if you'd be willing, if you can, maybe you can't always, but if you'd be willing to even text me and say, can't talk right now in a meeting. I've now changed the system because I've asked it in a different way that gives him an opportunity to respond in a different way.
And I want people to hear that by being that influencer, Liz still lands in connection.
Yes, I love that you just said that because thank you. This is the goal. So we're not trying, when we do a U turn with people, we're not making islands of people. I'm not saying you don't need anyone, don't need anyone, be independent. No. Humans are bonding creatures. We're born to bond. It's how we feel safe in the world. It's also how we get really hurt, but it's really how we heal,
Mhm.
and we heal in healing relationships. But we become part of that co creation of the healing relationship. But when we can U turn and heal ourselves, that allows us to come back out into a return towards the other person. And that's the goal. We're building ourselves into bridges
Yeah, and
towards some.
yes, and one thing that's really it really landed as you were speaking to it was you physically can stay in the present time zone and your system can very quickly go back to that time zone of when you were a little person who didn't get that need met. And then these protectors came online. And I want people to really slow down. And if they need to rewind to that, to hear it. Liz's system time traveled
Mhm.
and then was trying to get her needs met in the present day.
Thank you for slowing that down, Tara, because that is the most important piece. Is that, and I love that you use time travel because I was also just about to say that. You and I are in a system here. Our right brains are talking to each other.
Hmm?
So, yes, what I thought was happening with my partner was really what had happened in my past. And when something starts to look scary to my organism, who had had 2 decades of my mother, my mother was not a very present person for me for her own reasons. This isn't about making a monster of my mother, but she wasn't capable of meeting my needs. She was not a warm, loving presence. If I started to talk about myself, she made it about her. And so there was so many ways in which I felt abandoned by her, unseen by her. And then I concluded as a child, I must not be that important, or there must be something wrong with me. So that when my partner didn't answer a text, that's where I went. And that's actually the past intruding on the present. It's an old belief that got embedded in me of I'm not lovable. And that part of me who's holding that belief went, see, it's happening again right now. He didn't text you in 5 minutes. But that's not reality.
Mhm.
That's that part of me who developed that belief. That's its reality. And it will project it onto current day reality until I can help it make that distinction. Your past was painful, but your present isn't your past.
Mm.
And I want, even if, let's just say my partner was having an affair, because that's possible. I don't want to say, I don't want people to mistrust themselves.
Mhm.
It is possible that that was happening. And, some part of me had a spidey sense. But what I want you to consider is that often the intent, when we're feeling something quite intensely and we don't have evidence for it, it's probably something about the past.
Mm.
But if it was that my partner was having an affair and my, system was informing me of it, I also have different choices and options for how to feel about that, because I might have a part who thinks if he's having an affair, I'm going to die.
Mhm.
And that's really true about my adult self. It can be excruciating.
Mhm.
It's painful to be betrayed. I don't want to dismiss that. But for a child, that kind of abandonment can mean life and death. And that's why the reaction is so intense.
Yeah. I want people to really, if they can, to really feel into this because the integration of that mind and body is so crucial here. And the being able to be with both because the context, a lot of things that get created into words, that's coming from the brain. Maybe it's originating from the body, and that's how the brain's making meaning. And a lot of people don't realize common sense actually starts in the heart and then gets delivered to the brain. And the heart signals to the brain way more than the brain signals down to the heart.
That is true. And let me put this into sort of a neuroscience
Yeah.
frame. We all have nervous systems, and there's this part of our body called the amygdala, and it develops before another part called the hypothalamus. The amygdala's job is to take snapshots of reality, that I'm just using that as a metaphor, but its job is to keep us safe. And so it takes snapshots of experiences that have been unsafe. So let's say for me, crying in the crib, I was left there until I cried myself out. My amygdala said, "You're going to die. No one's coming."
Mm,
So that, and then the hypothalamus's job is to discern and to go, is that a lizard or is that a rock?
mhm,
And the amygdala says it's a lizard, and it's taken that snapshot and there's a bad situation that happens again and again and again, then your amygdala kind of takes over and your hypothalamus doesn't have a chance to actually develop very well. So its discernment between danger and safety isn't very well developed because there hasn't been a resting point for it to be able to make those distinctions.
mhm,
And what that means is that when your amygdala goes off and says danger, your whole nervous system in your body mobilizes to get you safe. So this is where we go into the fight or flight. I'm sure people have heard of that. You might go into a freeze. There's another one called feign death, where you demobilize. When you go into these deep depressions, you can't get out of bed, your body is bringing you into almost like a pre-death. Like if a lion was bearing down on you and you just knew this was over, your body would just power down so that you weren't actually present for your own death. It's a
mhm.
it's a brilliant system.
Yes.
So your body takes over. Now it goes first, and then if there's room for your brain, because
Mhm,
your thinking brain, actually your neocortex where thinking lives, it was the last thing to develop in your brain. It actually is the first thing to go, because when your body is mobilizing for fight or flight, it thinking becomes a luxury, it's going to take all your resources and put them where they belong, blood into your fists, into your legs to run or to power you down.
Mhm.
So if you do have, if usually if you're in a hyper aroused, the fight or flight state, you might have enough brain to just go, something bad's happening. Let's tell a story and figure out what it is. But the story's inaccurate. It's
Yes.
inaccurate.
Mhm.
Because
Yeah.
you,
Oh, go ahead.
well, just that you don't have a full brain, you have a little bit of brain, and usually it's binary thinking. If you're not for me, you're against me. Because your full brain might say, or it's not just that you're for me or against me, but maybe there's something also going on for you, or there's an external circumstance like my partner's in a meeting, my partner's turned their phone off, my partner's phone died, or it fell in the river. There's so many other things that are possible than he's having an affair.
Yeah. This is one of the ways I know that I'm in it is when I get my system takes me to an either or.
Yes.
And it's a rock and a hard place. That's where I'm between. It's not both and, it's that either or. And so I want people as they hear this, that as they're, because this is a very rich topic here, and as they're listening to this, that it all first begins in awareness. And so I want them to hear that.
So let me just ask you, when you say it all first begins in awareness, do you mean the healing begins in awareness?
So for me, it is first it the starting place is aware of I'm not happy with where I am,
Yes.
or I need this to change.
Yes.
So it's that awareness that something's not right or it doesn't align, or I'm out of sync with myself, or I'm out of sync with someone else. For me, it's that awareness.
That's right. And I think that's true. People usually, for instance, don't go to therapy until they have reached a threshold of pain, right? And it's sort of too bad because that awareness can be useful at any time. But it is, our awareness is what's going to put us into the driver's seat
Yeah.
and allow us to get curious about ourselves and say, what's happening in me?
Yes.
Which brings us back, at least in my brain, back to, this idea of unhooking from other people. And there's this really great motivational speaker named Mel Robbins. I don't know if you've heard of her.
Mhm.
She's this great uh, expression, which is let them.
Mhm.
And what she's talking about is let other people be other people. They're making a mistake, let them. They're being rude, let them. Let other people be other people because they will experience the consequences of their actions, and we don't have to change them. And it's a great energy saver not to have to change other people. But the fact of the matter is we can't. So we can influence, we can change ourselves. We're the only ones we can change, but we can't make other people change.
Yeah.
But now why did I go down this road? There was a really good reason. I can't remember.
You started with how it was for people with unhooking.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. When you unhook and you realize I actually can't change someone else, you gain your freedom to be able to look inside and help yourself. And I used to use this metaphor of a speedboat. If you can imagine you're standing on shore and the other person is a speedboat. If you take your cable and you clip it to their speedboat, when they have a reaction or they do something and they zoom out of that bay, you're going with them,
Yeah.
right? Because you hooked yourself into them in a way that you're no longer in the driver's seat, you're being yanked along. So if you unclip your cable from their speedboat, you get to stay on the shore and watch and observe and stay safe and see what happens. Be curious. Oh, I know where I was going with this, which brings me back to, this idea that we can't make ourselves love ourselves. But
Mhm.
what we can do is start with curiosity and observation.
Mhm.
What is happening inside me? Why do I get so reactive? Why
Mhm.
is this painful? What story am I telling myself? What am I afraid of here? And where does that come from? Where did I learn that? What do I believe about myself? And where did that belief come from? I wasn't born with it.
Mhm.
To start examining our feelings, thoughts, beliefs, to notice our bodies. Why is my heart racing? What's it trying to tell me? Is
Mhm.
that really what's happening right now in the world? I remember being shocked when my first, one of my earliest therapists was helping me notice what was happening in my body. And then she said, now notice where you are. Is something bad happening right here, right now in this room? And there was a part of me that almost wanted to say, yeah, but the truth was right here, right now, nothing bad was happening. And
Mhm.
I that brought me into the present moment. And I had to face that reality was not the story in my head, and my body was mistaken in the moment.
Yeah.
It was trying to help me. God bless my body, and I love it so much.
Mhm.
So this is not about, exiling our bodies. It's listening, but then checking and saying, okay, you're letting me know something wrong. Is something's wrong? But let's just see, is something actually wrong right here, right now? Or was something wrong a long time ago and you're really trying to protect me?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. So and as I hear that, it makes a lot of sense for me as I hear that. And to me, choice really leads to freedom for my
Yeah.
system.
Yes.
And that's what I
Absolutely.
right there.
Well, that's it. Because if you know what's happening with you, you have so many more choices and options.
Yes.
One of which is I could be really mad at all of the Liz's in my 20s who made really terrible choices, but those Liz's were trying to get love.
Hmm.
And they did in the only ways they knew how, but they ended up being pretty destructive ways. But I have compassion for that because I didn't have good role models. I didn't have a trusted adult to help guide me. I didn't know what else to do. And when I can love her, I'm going to come back out into the world with different choices to other people as well, to how I relate to others. Because if I'm mad at myself, I'm probably going to be mad at others. If I'm kind to myself and have compassion, I'm probably going to have compassion for others because other people also have experiences that have made them be in the world in certain ways or have certain parts of them develop in certain ways.
Hmm. Yeah. So that makes sense to me. And as we've been speaking, there's one thing that just keeps coming up. So before we close this out, if you feel like, okay, yeah, I have time to answer this, I can imagine there's people who are listening who maybe are either taken back or afraid to ever admit that their parents did any wrong that would impact them in such a way, like that loyalty to mom and dad. Because it does take a lot of courage or bravery to say, yeah, my parents didn't really have it to give it. And now as an adult, I have to go and learn it. But I know there's a lot of people who are like, I can't ever go to learn it because I never want to highlight to my parents that
Yes,
they were wrong.
that's right. And I'm so appreciating that you brought that up because I myself, had a hard time at first
Mhm.
talking about these things because my mom was clear. I didn't mind talking about her, but my dad was not clear for me. And I was afraid to talk about it because I didn't want to lose my dad. If I started to talk about things, then would that make him a bad person?
Mhm.
And what I'm going to say is, and I truly believe this in my heart, all parents are doing their best and are just, reenacting or following along from what they learned or what was modeled to them or based on their experiences. They're doing their best and they just might not know how.
Mhm.
And so, this is not when we look at ourselves and our histories, it's not to look for a culprit in our parents. It's not to make monsters of them. But our parents may not have received good care themselves because their parents didn't, and because there wasn't a context or not a context, a framework for that. Neuroscience is only just really helping us understand how those parent-child relationships work. We didn't have that, 20, 30 years ago. So, and it's not in the mainstream still.
Mm.
So instead of it being the focus is my parents failed, it's my parents did the best they could, but when they were maybe taking care of something in themselves, for me as a child, it didn't work because what I really needed was this kind of attention, and they didn't know how. They didn't have the capacity or the training.
Mm.
That's different. It's not on purpose.
I hope people just caught the importance of that last statement, that it wasn't on purpose.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I also want to say right here, there's a difference when we're caught, when our system's caught in that survival mode. We don't have a lot of choices because that's not the function of surviving.
that's right. That's also very important to highlight is that, your body is going to do a whole bunch of things without your permission.
Mhm.
That's a negativity bias that's built into us for survival. Because if you've got an animal bearing down on you and you don't know whether it's a lion or a pussy cat, you have to err on the side of it,
Mhm.
thinking it's a lion so that you can mobilize for survival. Because if you wait and say, well, I'll just wait and see and then I'll make my decision, you could be lunch for that lion if that's what it turns out to be.
Yeah.
So, this is really important. It's not an act of will when we shut down or we go into these survival states. It's not because you lack will,
Mm.
it's because your body is pulling you into a state. And we have to learn how to help our bodies not go into that state. That's where the will comes in, the awareness. We have to learn how to help our bodies. But our bodies have a default mode that is there to help us.
Yeah. Gosh, I hope that really lands for people to hear that. To me, that landed as just a really beautiful invitation to start to get to know yourself.
Mhm.
You
That's
don't
the
have
biggest
to.
gift you can give yourself is to get to know
Yes.
yourself.
Yes. And so, Liz, before we close this one out, is there anything else you would like to add or to give context around so people's brains and system can kind of chew on them and just continue to really truly be that mustard seed?
I really want to just say to people, first of all, my heart goes out to everyone because this journey of being a human is so hard. And even though no one meant to do it on purpose, even if they acted out and looked purposeful, we are all trying to survive and thrive and we're born into these bodies that are trying to keep us alive and help us thrive. And they want us to connect. And so I really want people to remember that the getting to know yourself is in service of connection and community and getting even more supports and giving, being able to give more too, being part of that interconnectivity. That we are interconnected. We do belong to a system and we can benefit it for the good of everybody.
Mm.
And if we can get ourselves into a more self-loving place, more self-compassion, more self-connection, we can feed that back into the system. And it's only going to reap rewards.
Yeah. And I love that. And what I really heard there was if you don't want to walk alone, you don't
Mm.
have to.
Beautifully said, Tara. Beautifully said.
Liz, thank you so much for your time and for all of your wisdom around this. And I'll get all your information from you if people just want to sit like get in connection or they want to read more about what you're putting out into the world. I'll get all that for everybody and it'll be in the post. But I'm just extremely grateful. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. This was such a pleasure, and I love talking about this.
Yeah, thank you.